Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about this new Netflix documentary on Queen Cleopatra the Seventh, uh, directed by Jada Pinkett Smith, starring Adele. I think Adele Smith is the actress's name, and the current controversy that is going on. Adele Smith, the actress, is a mixed race woman. She is British, basically a British black woman, and the Egyptian government is now filing a lawsuit against Netflix for falsely, as they put it, falsely portraying uh, Queen Cleopatra the Seventh as a black woman and basically falsifying Egyptian history. It is done by the lawsuit is done by this man named Mohammed Samadi, an Egyptian lawyer who said that Netflix is falsifying Egyptian history. You know, portraying Queen Cleopatra the Seventh as a black woman. Now, this goes into a lot of the discussions that we have on this channel about historical misrepresentations and basically historical myths and historical lies, and how conquering conquering pop, conquering populations will appropriate the cultures of conquered populations to fit their own political and social agendas, and tell some of the story yet leave some of the story untold. We talk about it with regards to the last two videos, the Sudan video where we talked about how uh, Sudan, the northern Sudanese, portray themselves as culturally Arab and distinct from other parts of Sudan. Well, this ties into it because, as many people know, and as I discussed in that video as well, Sudanese culture is inextricably linked in a symbiotic sense to the Egyptian culture. Hey, Lisa, what's going on? And the first of all, what do I think about the Netflix documentary? I must admit, I didn't watch it all. I watched some of it. And within this documentary, even though they are wielding this agenda and the whole narrative that Queen I can't even say her name today. Queen Cleopatra was a black woman. They mentioned that Cleopatra's ancestry was also Ptolemaic Greek and not native Egyptian. But really, what this whole controversy is getting at is the belief that modern day Egyptians and white people here in the United States have that ancient Egyptians, were not an African civilization, and trying to divorce ancient Egyptian civilization from the whole African continent, which is what they've been trying to do for centuries because they don't want to give the African people the credit for any of the achievements and basically all of the achievements of Western civilization, because Western civilization, for the most part, derives a lot of the things that we have, a lot of things that we take for granted, originated with ancient Egypt, or originated in ancient Egypt, passed down to the Greeks, and from there passed down to the Romans. But they don't want to say that, okay, it all started with ancient Egypt, and ancient Egypt was essentially a black civilization, that ancient Egypt's origins lie lower than the Nile, actually extend to the Blue Nile, which is all the way in Uganda. So the origins of the Nile Valley civilizations, as the late historian Sheikh Anta Diop put it, actually lie further south than Egypt, in the heart of Africa. And that it was the Nubians and the Sudanese who basically started ancient Egyptian civilization, way further back than even Cleopatra. What you got to understand about ancient Egypt, guys, was that it existed for thousands of years. It existed for so long that historians break up ancient Egypt into multiple dynastic periods. You got the Old Kingdom, which is the one that we're most familiar with, the one that built the three pyramids of Giza that we all love and admire, the Sphinx, the Temple at Karnak. You got the Middle Kingdom, which they call the Hyksos period, where foreigners from West Asia basically were ruling in Egypt. And then you have the New Kingdom, which was after Tutmosis II, which they call the Imperial Age of Egypt. None of these Egyptian dynastic periods have anything to do with Cleopatra the Seventh. Cleopatra the Seventh, who was the seventh Cleopatra, her dynastic rule started with Alexander the Great, who invaded Egypt in the third in 300 BC. So her lineage has nothing to do with the ancient Egyptians that the modern racial controversy stems from. Her lineage goes back to the Greeks. Now, some people want to debate, okay, the ancient Greeks on their temples as well in places like such as the Minoan civilization and Crete. They were probably dark skinned as well. And then you had the the Athenian civilization, and from there you had Alexander the Great, and then you had the Hellenistic civilization, which conquered Persia, which Persia was in control of Egypt at that time. So my whole point of saying this is that by the time Cleopatra the Seventh came around, Egypt, the complexion of Egypt, had already changed. The native civilization was already subsumed into invader civilizations. First the Babylonians, then the Persians, and even before that, the West Asian Hyksos. So it would kind of be like looking at culture in the 1990s and saying that American people of the 1990s were the same exact people as the Native Americans, which we know that wasn't true. You know what I mean? That's how old Egypt was. Egypt was so old that when Herodotus, who was an Athenian historian, was writing about it, he was writing about it as if it was. I'm getting there, Lisa. As if it was, if it was, if it itself was old. You know what I mean? He was writing it about Egyptian history as Egyptian history was already old in his time. Now, if at the time of Cleopatra, Egypt was already subject to multiple invasions, and the complexion of Egypt was already changed by the time Cleopatra came around, how much more is it today already changed? Because after Cleopatra um, dies by suicide, then you have the Romans that come in. The Romans last for several hundred years. Then after that, you have the Christian period of Egypt, and then in the seventh century, finally, the rise of Islam and the modern Arab civilization, which are the modern day people that exist in Egypt today. So, if they were already mixed and surpassed and supplanted by then, how much more are they now? Basically, now the yeah, unalived. Basically, now Egypt is a completely different nation, both culturally, religiously, complexion wise, and every other wise there is. The Egypt of her day is like the difference between America and China. That's how culturally different the Egyptians of modern times are to the Egyptians of her times, and let alone before that. You know what I mean? So that's how old this civilization is. This is one of the first civilizations in modern human history. I mean, it's so old that it was old then. It's so old that it was old even when Christ existed on earth. It was old then. It was old during the time of Moses, even when the ancient Hebrews were allegedly, according to the Bible, enslaved there. So the ancient Egyptians I mean, the modern Egyptians that are suing the government for not portraying Egyptian history accurately, they have no reason to talk and they have no reason to bring this shit up because they have nothing to do with modern Egyptian culture. They don't follow the religion. They don't follow the religion of ancient Egypt. They don't speak the language of ancient Egypt. They don't follow the customs of ancient Egypt. And they barely share a bloodline with the original ancient Egyptians. She didn't either, but they sure, if she didn't, then they sure as hell don't either. They're even further removed from ancient Egyptian history of the Old Kingdom and the pyramids than she is, or than she was. And like Lisa is saying, the Egyptian government is getting mad at them portraying her as an African and trying to uh, Africanize Egypt. First of all, how can you Africanize a country that is already on the African continent, whose culture was already like or similar or derived from the people of the African continent? If you look at ancient Egyptian religion, it is much more similar to African type religions that we see in the modern world, such as the Yoruba and Dahomey religions, than it is to Islam or Christianity or Judaism or any other Middle Eastern religion. If you look at the customs of the ancient Egyptian people that were existing before, during, and a little bit after the time of the Ptolemaic rule, especially before, um, they are much more similar to other cultures in that area, like the Nubian culture and stuff, than they are to Middle Eastern culture or to Greek culture. So it is obvious from looking at the artifacts and the religion and the language that the ancient Egyptian culture was similar to the cultures surrounding it, especially the Hamitic cultures like Somalia and Ethiopia and, like I said, northern Sudan, than the Semitic cultures of the Jewish people or other Middle Eastern people, such as the pre-Islamic Arabs, and much more similar to the African people than the ancient Mediterranean people, like the Greeks or the Romans. It became similar to the Greeks and the Romans when the Greeks and the Romans invaded Egypt, or when the Arabs and the Semitic peoples invaded Egypt. But prior to all these invasions, it was much more similar and much more in sync with sub-Saharan African culture than um, the other cultures that they try to say it is. So, and they're getting mad at this depiction. But Elizabeth Taylor, who was not anything close to Egyptian, not even close to what modern Egyptians even look like, portrayed Cleopatra in the 1963 movie with Richard Burton. And she was a European lady. She was a Northern European lady, a very fair skinned European lady. She couldn't even pass for Macedonian, which Cleopatra traced her ancestry back from. So she was much more distant from the ancestry of Cleopatra or any Egyptian, ancient or modern, than this lady is. This lady is actually, the woman that's portraying her actually looks closer to even what a modern Egyptian would look like than Elizabeth Taylor, or even a modern Mediterranean person in complexion and looks and hair type and everything else than Elizabeth Taylor. But they didn't get mad at Elizabeth Taylor when Elizabeth Taylor portrayed her. They didn't get mad at the Ten Commandments movie when that came out in the early 1960s with Yul Brynner as Ramses II, but they get mad at this. And I think what this really shows is a lot of the anti-blackness in Middle Eastern and Arab culture that exists. They won't get mad if their people are incorrectly or their historical figures are incorrectly portrayed as Europeans, but they'll get mad. Northern Europeans, like Anglo Saxons, British, or whatever, they're happy to have Elizabeth Taylor portrayed or Yul Brynner portray ancient Egyptian historical figures, Tutankhamun or whatever. But in this documentary, when it's an African person, even though it itself is historically inaccurate, because, like I said, Cleopatra the 7th traced her ancestry from Greece. But the point is, or Macedonia, right? Or Macedon, Eastern Europe. But still, they get mad at one historical inaccuracy because it's black, but they don't get mad at the white historical inaccuracy because, well, they they have internalized anti black sentiment or behavior. People are flipping their lids about this portrayal or the portrayal of, like Lisa said, when they portrayed Jesus, who was a Middle Eastern man, a Middle Eastern Jewish man, as white, uh, as Jared Taylor would say, nobody cares, nobody bats an eyelash. But when you portray, if you were to portray him as African, as sub-Saharan African or black, quote unquote, or even closer to his actual real life complexion, darker skin, curlier hair, broader African features, then people want to flip out. This is not a new phenomenon with the Egyptian government, though, because in the 1970s, uh, a movie about Egyptian President Anwar Sadat came out. And this movie about Anwar Sadat was half Nubian. His mother was from, I mean, not Nubian, some Sudanese tribe. I forget the name of the tribe, but some Sudanese tribe. His mother, basically, he was half black. You know what I mean? Half black and half Arabic, and he appeared black. And Lou Gossett Jr. Portrayed him in a movie about his life after he was assassinated. And the Egyptian government got mad at this, even though it was it was it was clearly obvious that the man was of African descent. But because he was somebody of historical significance in Egyptian culture, they're like, oh no, we can't have him be African. We can't have him be black. We got to portray him with lighter skin. We got to portray him as closer to European DNA. And also, I find it highly hypocritical that Egypt, a government, modern day Egypt, is upset about this civilization or so concerned about ancient Egyptian civilization that when they came into ancient Egypt in the 7th century, when they saw the pyramids and the Sphinx and all this, They were the ones who disrespected ancient Egypt. They looted the temples. They tore the nose off the Sphinx. They tried to destroy the pyramids several times in Egyptian history. Islamic fundamentalists, much like Christian fundamentalists, much like any Abrahamic religion, consider these ancient Egyptian artifacts that they preciously hold dear to that are okay. A person from the Middle East. First of all, Egypt is not technically, Egypt is in the Middle East, but technically the Middle East is not a geographical designation. Vidgoa, technically, we established that she was ancient. She was Greek. She wasn't of ancient Egyptian origin at all. So she wasn't even from the Middle East. She was basically from Southern Europe. I think she did have some Sadian, Iranian DNA because, as we know, Alexander the Great, he his troops mixed a lot in with the Sadians and other um, Iranian type regimes. But how is this sad that it's happening? What you're saying that it's sad it's happening? Why is it? Was it equally as sad? Okay, but you're saying it's sad. But why was it? Okay, was it sad when Elizabeth Taylor portrayed her? Was it sad when British people portray uh, Middle Eastern figures in history that are of Middle Eastern descent? Or is it only sad when a person of Middle Eastern descent gets portrayed by a sub-Saharan African or Black African? I mean, you said it's sad, so I would like to. I mean, ideally, if you're gonna make a movie about the life of Cleopatra, shouldn't it be a Greek person, a person of Greek descent portraying Cleopatra? Anything else would be inaccurate. What makes one historical inaccuracy worse than another historical inaccuracy? Is it that okay? You said okay. The Caucasian look. Okay, the so-called Caucasian uh, look. Okay, that's your opinion. And thank you for your comment. I very much respect uh, that you're obviously an Egyptian person. You know, a person of Egyptian descent. You understand. Uh, you have a firmer grasp of of your country. You have a firmer grasp of your country's history than okay, okay. Well, Israel. That's a conversation that we have a lot. Um, on this channel, a place that we have a lot of discussions about on this channel, um, with regards to that. So okay, um, but still respect your opinion, and you're from that part of the world, that region of the world, as it were. You have a maybe not from Egypt itself, but you're familiar with, I guess, uh, you know, Middle Eastern, uh, that type of geopolitical worldview. Uh, just out of curiosity, um, you say you're Israeli, but is your family of Middle Eastern descent, or are you of European descent, are you Mizrahi, or Mizrahi slash Sephardic, or are you um, Ashkenazim, or are you not even Jewish, and are you just Arabic? Not trying to challenge you, uh, friend, or trying to be combative in any way. Just curious to know, you know, your opinion on this. We all have different opinions, right? Uh, it says, as you know, Jewish people are originally from the Middle East, and all of the people that are genetically Jewish would say, yeah, I get that, but being as though Judaism is a religion, it's not. It's not. It's kind of like Christianity and Islam. It's different than Christianity and Islam in the sense that it is harder to convert to. It is not. Uh, they don't make it easily. It's easy, especially in the modern Jewish context. They make it extremely hard to convert to. So it's more of a religion than it is. Not all Jewish people share the exact same genetics. There are people that do convert to Judaism. Would you agree to that? It's not the same thing. Not the uh, um You gotta excuse me, guys. I don't uh, having some uh, technical difficulties, but yeah, he says I would love to expand upon the differences. The difference, if you would be kind enough to put a link. From my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure about the link stuff. I'm not really sure how to do this. I'm just kind of learning it, um, learning as I go along. But from my understanding, as far as the technology part, but as far as the history part, I agree with you that to some extent Jewish people do share in um, in the Middle Eastern uh, type genetic cluster, especially the J haplogroup. But um, as far as like Arabs and Jewish people and Arameans and the Nabatean culture and a lot of the ancient Semitic cultures, especially those from like the Tigris and the Euphrates, Mesopotamian regions, and also in parts of the Egyptian culture. But as far as this portrayal, Cleopatra, I gotta, I gotta say that it's uh, not even Middle Eastern. More so Macedonian and uh, Greek. But they're just taking, I guess, creative license when it comes to their portrayal of this. But I do find it highly hypocritical that people will complain about one misportrayal but completely skip over another misportrayal or mischaracterization of their history. Like they don't complain when it's Northern Europeans, but they complain when it's Africans.